you to you, Anne Atkins. Also, 5 Live, your call, 0500 909 693. Give me a call. Last summer's riots. Do you blame the parents? Are parents shirking responsibility, as Greg has just outlined to us? It's 5 Live. It's your call. It's 9:37 with Rachel this morning. Nikki back tomorrow for 5 Live breakfast. Last summer's riots. We've had this report attempting to outline the causes behind it. Do you blame the parents? Much of the report pointed to various elements lacking in children's lives, in particular a positive role model, a lack of discipline and lack of moral guidance. How much do you blame the parents? Greg in Manchester was talking to us just before 9:30. He says parents are shirking responsibility. All sorts of other explanations have already been touted this morning, some pretty contentious. Let's talk to Sophie in Colchester. Good morning, Sophie.
Good morning.
What do you think?
I think that the parents are to blame, to be honest with you, more than anybody else.
Sophie, 2 seconds and turn off your radio. Do you mind?
Yep, no problem. It's not my radio, actually. It's my assistant. I do apologise.
That's absolutely fine. And once that's done, we can talk to you and hear you properly. Go on.
Yep. I was listening this morning in abject horror, to be honest with you, for your young lady who started talking about, well, if you took them back to where they came from, this always happens and it's the normal for them. And I'm thinking, what, Croydon? And she said, no, the Caribbean. And I don't believe it is a racial thing. I think it's bored kids who don't have enough guidance at home. I blame the Jeremy Kyle generation, where they all want the iPads and the iPods and the Nike trainers and the latest technology, but they're not prepared to get out of bed and work very hard to get them.
And Lynette Burrows was the writer, the broadcaster that you were referring to, who made those comments earlier.
Horrified, absolutely, because she sounded like an educated woman, and I was just horrified. The Caribbean mothers that I've had the good fortune to know, to be honest with you, their children wouldn't have dared do it because they would have got a good slap round the ear when they got home. And I watched on the news, when it was all happening as well, I watched the mother of a 14-year-old child explaining why she didn't think it was her son's fault that he'd been involved. And all I could think to myself was, why on earth was he out there unsupervised? I have 2 14-year-olds and a 6-year-old, and we live in a small village. And if that sort of thing had been happening near where I lived, they wouldn't have been outside.
Jeremy Kyle culture, Aurora in Bristol. Stay with us, Sophie. Aurora in Bristol. You see something similar, do you?
Well, I don't know how far you can go. What, blame the parents and then blame the grandparents for not looking after their children? I blame society as a whole. I think the messages and the images that are, put into everybody's front room through television and internet, the big message that's sent out today is every man for himself. Get what you can, get as much as you can. Go out there, buy this, buy that, and once you've got it, you just want to buy something else.
Well, that's interesting.
Because
that is something.
It's not just the images that are put into our living rooms. It's people like the MPs, the expensive scandal. They're out there just getting what they can get, aren't they?
And this is something that the report looked at, and they said 50% of the crimes involved in the riots were of an acquisitive nature. It was about getting stuff, effectively,
and people being unhappy with not having things. But I think you can also look at the bankers. Everybody's out there doing what they can to get something for nothing. The bankers, they have half of their wages in bonuses, so they don't have to pay tax and put money back into society.
Well, hang on a second. There would be people who say they worked very, very hard for those bonuses. So
but these children
it's not something for nothing
working
necessarily.
hard. They won't get out. I work in recruitment. I set up my company 10 years ago. I had about £600 in my pocket, and that was all I had. I'd no business experience whatsoever, but I wanted a nice house, and I wanted a nice car, and I wanted nice things. And I was a waitress, and I felt that was the only way that I could do it. And my company's been doing really well for 10 years. We get these kids in my office day in, day out, right? They slouch over the desk. They come in. They're unprepared. We get them, and they say to us, well, we don't really want a job, to be honest with you, but the job centre says that they'll stop my benefits if I don't turn up. They don't want to work. If they want to earn nice, if they want to have nice things, they want to have a nice car, do you know what? Get a job.
Who instills, though, that sense of pride in the self that you provide for yourself? I wonder. Brian Lightman is General Secretary of the Association of College and School and College Leaders. Hi, Brian. Is that a picture, the one that Sophie's described, and Aurora, is that a picture that you recognise?
No, it isn't a picture that we recognise of the vast majority of young people, and I think that's what we've got to remember, that we're talking here about far too many, but nevertheless a very small proportion of the population who were involved in these things. Now, I'm not playing it down at all. It was appalling, and we never want to see it happening again. But I think we have to remember actually that the majority of young people are very different from that.
Right. So what do you ascribe it to? And when you are faced with difficulties with young people in your colleges, how much do you go back to the parents and say, what's going on at home? Right.
Well, I mean, the first thing I'd say is that I don't think there are any simplistic answers to explaining the riots, and I think it's very dangerous to go down the route of trying to ascribe blame for one particular group of people. This was a societal problem. It was, deeply embedded in our society, and I think we have to look at the whole range of issues there. But as far, when we have these situations in schools where we have children, we all have this sort of we come across these kinds of families which are very, very dysfunctional, and where the children don't have the right role models and they don't have any help in life to start. I think schools try their very hardest to compensate for that, and we do try and work with those parents. But the important message I think we need to learn from the experience of the riots is that we're just not having enough success in getting all of the agencies to work together, because those families have deep-seated problems which we've got to really intervene with.
Well, that's interesting. Troubled Families. Dave Milliken is Director of Family Services at Homestart UK. We can't speak to him just for the moment, but we will come to him in just a moment or two perhaps. But there is this identification of these 500,000 forgotten families where the government is now talking about putting in some serious money to intervene and to help them. Do you think there is an answer in that? And if you were to have that kind of funding, what would you pay for? What would you do with it?
I think it's got to be welcome that they want to do something about these families, but then they aren't forgotten. You ask any head teacher, and they will tell you that there are a number of families, and I'm sure they can all name them, who cause massive problems within their schools. And one of the things that I think we need in school is the ability to have people like homeschool liaison workers who can go and you talked about the previous one of the people phoning in just spoke about children who don't want young people who don't want jobs.
That's
and this
Sophie.
Sort of thing.
She's still with us.
Yeah. Well, this is there are major issues sometimes. With families who don't make the children get out of bed. The child won't come to school, and it starts very early. And we need to be able to actually go into those families and say this is not acceptable. We've got to have those children into school, and where those children are being allowed to roam the streets and get up to all sorts of mischief, we need to have the right sort of interventions to actually get them on the right track.
Have you got enough ability to impose discipline within schools, do you think, Brian?
Within schools, I think we have all the ability we need to impose discipline. The issue is that we can't be responsible for what happens on a Saturday night or a Friday night out in the town.
And then we go back to the parents. Joyce in Rochdale in Greater Manchester, good morning.
Good morning.
And morning to David as well. How are you?
Hello.
David, what do you think? Are parents to blame?
I think we're going to go back to basics in about 50 years' time, because we're realising that things ain't working. The 90% and the 10% stats that you've given are the 10% being more important, really, than the 90%.
And just to explain to people, because I was saying that I'd read a statistic that
the 90% is made up of weekends, late night, and sleeping time.
Yes, yeah.
When the child finishes school, they're latchkey kids. They don't come home to a parent at home producing tea, seeing homeworks done, television, bath, bed. None of that exists, and it hasn't done for donkey's years. When we ultimately realise we don't need two parents out of work, we've got mass unemployment because of it. We need one wage earner who has sufficient system in the country to be able to pay the bills, so that whether it's the male or the female, one parent is at home, so the parent knows what the child is doing.
Well, it's not universally the case that both parents are out working.
No, I don't think. I'm sorry. I'm not going to have that at all. I'm self-employed, and I I work incredibly hard to make sure that my children do not suffer for my employment choices, to be honest with you. I pick up my children. I think my childminder collects them twice a week, but on 3 nights a week I pick up my children, I take them home, I do homework with them, I make sure that they have all the activities that they want. Excuse me, you've had your say. I make sure that they do all the activities that they should be doing and they are well-rounded, and then I carry on doing my work after they've gone to bed.
You're a better parent than you. That's because you're abrogating your responsibility onto someone else because your career is more important than bringing up your children.
Excuse me? I just said that I pick up my children.
You do not have children because your decision is that you won't work more than your children.
I do a full-time career. I run 2 companies.
I don't care if we run 6 companies. Your responsibility is to the children that you've produced in this world.
I don't think you're listening to me. I pick my children up from
before
school.
I came onto the radio. I know that you're a successful person in business.
And I pick my children up from school and they excel in school. My children are happy round the home.
OK, let's bring in Joyce here. Good morning, Joyce.
Oh, good morning, Rachel. I bet you're sat there cringing at that guy because don't you work hard and don't you have 3 young children?
I'm listening respectfully to everything everyone says, Joyce. That is my role.
3 young children and you work and, I disagree with that guy. Everyone's entitled to work. But my point was, for excusing all these people and the behaviour, I think some people just lack a total and moral responsibility for themselves and others. And mine's really quite basic to the kind of comments that have been made. But I go in my park every day with my little dog, and I went in Monday morning, and brilliant weekend. The park was absolutely rammed all weekend. And the first job my parkie does every morning is he picks up the litter. There are lots and lots of litter bins all over the park. We knew he wasn't in Monday morning because the place was strewn with litter. The litter bins are full overflowing, but on the tennis courts, on the parks, on the playing fields where there are empty bins, people drop their litter where they are. They arrive in their cars, so they're not poor. They've got a reasonable intelligence to pass the driving test. But they just drop their litter. They can't even be bothered. And I'm not talking little bits of litter. The park was a disgraceful eyesore.
So it starts with that. It starts with just a sense of... just a moment, David. David, just a moment.
To their children, and what example do they set if they can't even move litter?
Hang on, Joyce, 2 seconds. David?
Yes.
Can you just hold off just a sec? And that's okay. Let's hear Joyce. Joyce, so it's about responsibility for yourself, is what you're saying.
I think it's personal and moral responsibility for yourself. And those people, again, arrive in their cars, so they're reasonable intelligence, they've got money to afford a car, so you can't blame lack of education on their part. And if they just can't be bothered even, and I mean, the park was an eyesore. It was a disgrace.
Well, it's just as well my good friend Nicky Campbell isn't here this morning because his blood would be boiling. Joyce, thank you very much indeed. Go on, David.
Can I just make one more point?
One more from you, Sophie, one more from David, and then we'll move on. Yeah.
Okay, I would just like to say that although I am a working parent, one of the things that I work very hard to instill in my children is a good work ethic, and to let them know that nothing is given to you in this life for free, and anything that they receive, they have to work blooming hard for.
Sophie, thank you.
One of the things that I work very hard to.
Thank you for your contribution. David, go on.
I just feel that what I've said, I know I've said aggressively because my opinion is held by a lot of people and we're not listened to. Because everyone wants money, money, money. Therefore, 2 people have to earn. The child comes second. I'm sorry, it hurts to say it, but it's true.
David,
we're seeing the result now.
David, thank you. 0500 909 693. Feel free to tell us what you think about anything you've heard just there. The question we're asking, last summer's riots, do you blame the parents? 0500 909 693. It's 10 to 9. We'll come to Ian in Chippenham in just a moment, who's been waiting very patiently, but Michelle's here as well with the travel news for us. How's it looking?
Well, Merseyside.
Masses of texts and tweets, and I'm sorry that we haven't managed to read out more of them, but here's just a few. Why is it always someone else's fault, asks Duncan in Hastings. Teenagers smash up London, steal goods, assault people, and apparently it's not their fault, it's teachers and police. No, it is nobody's fault but their own. Someone else, I can't believe what I'm hearing from a disappointed black man in Newcastle. I would normally be happy to talk on the programme, but I'm too angry. Education, parenting, lack of self-discipline, morals and opportunism are contributing factors to the rioting, not the colour of your skin. John in Hendon says, can you please challenge the gentleman we had on earlier who talked about Tottenham, big money, the Jewish involvement in the riots. It's disgusting to let people get away with that on the radio. Youth throughout history have always rebelled, says John in Deeside. We have a bigger population now, so it's a bigger problem. And finally, the riots were caused by a lack of discipline from an early age. Children are no longer afraid of parents, teachers or police. We need to get back to basics and treat children like children, not young adults. Let's go to Ian in Chippenham in Wiltshire. Good morning, Ian.
Yes, good morning.
Thanks for hanging on. So who do you blame for last summer's riots?
Well, I rang up originally to query the whole premise of this programme with its concentration on parenting, because I believe the statistics show that the vast majority of those arrested were in fact adults. However,
most of them were over 18, most of them were also under 25, so that's the kind of bracket we're talking about.
Adults, aren't they? However, if the statistic existed, I suspect that most of those arrested would have in their background an unstable family background, i.e. not brought up in a conventional two-family unit. After all, now, I believe 40 to 50% of children are in fact born to single couples, or unmarried couples, if you like, which I think you probably find is the root of this problem.
Well, as someone has already said, it doesn't necessarily.
Breakdown in the Afro-Caribbean family unit, as opposed to the strongest family unit in the country, which I believe is the Chinese community, and I think that hardly any, if in fact any at all, Chinese were involved in these rioting. So do not the statistics speak for themselves?
Well, yeah, statistics tell perhaps some of the story, maybe not all of it, but we've already had someone on to say, listen, having a conventional two-parent married couple within the family home does not necessarily absolutely determine that your child will not riot.
And Atkins said, almost every inquiry or survey you like to come across says that children brought up in a conventional married two-parent family turn out better than these broken families. I mean, could there anything be sadder than to see these children and babies being farmed out at early hours of the morning, taken to these baby farms where they're looked after by uneducated, ignorant so-called minders, as evidenced by this recent survey?
That's not everyone's experience at nursery, I have to tell you, Ian. But stay there. Sharon, who's in Ely in Cambridgeshire. Good morning, Sharon.
Hello, Rachel.
I think you agree to a certain extent, do you?
Well, not with what that man's, the way he's putting it, all the, people's different ethnicities and stuff, but the fact is that today everyone's expected to go to work, mum and dad, and I don't mean just because they want to, they're expected to, and a lot of the time they have to.
Well, the government put
both to go to work.
The government does put in incentives to get women, to get mothers back into work by providing free childcare.
So they want mothers to go back to work, and then they ask, well, where are the mothers and fathers when the children are out doing all these things? Well, you wanted them all back to work. You can't have it both ways. And now we've got a couple of generations where people know nothing other than both parents being back at work. And if you're a stay-at-home mum, people look at you like, well, what are you doing? Why aren't you going to work? And everyone...
There is nothing more important than a mother being at home, bringing up her children in their early years.
Why just a mother? Can a father not do the job?
Yeah, either the mother or the father, but that's not what people think anymore. That's not how it... It
may not be what foolish people think.
No, that's just the way life is now. And if the government are encouraging mothers to go back to work, like they want to encourage marriage, so they'll make positive things for that. Well, why don't you make positive things for people being at home with their children? A lot of my friends would rather stay at home, but for just the difference of £100 to £200 a month, they will go out at work and put their children in childcare, which they don't want to do. But because £100 to £200 would make that much difference to them, they need to.
So, Sharon,
you get a big flat screen television or some awful holiday on some island somewhere.
No, to me, you just sound like an old man with silly views who are just coating everybody with the same brush. That's not. That's just because people need it to live. Do you know how much council tax is at the moment? If you've got children, paying for that, paying for your electricity, paying for your water.
I don't think you pay more council tax because you've got children.
No, but I'm saying these things have got to be paid for, haven't they? So if £100 to £200 makes that much of a difference to you...
Yeah, so for the sake of £100 to £200, you'd farm your children out to be looked after by...
Ian and Sharon, this is not primarily a discussion about methods of childcare, although obviously that is integral to what we're talking about this morning. But let's hear, just one moment, Ian, just one moment. Let's hear from Michael, who's in Malta. You're on Malta, are you, Michael?
Yep.
Very nice to talk to you from there. Let's hear what you have to say about this. Are parents to blame for last summer's riots?
This is slightly different from what's being talked about at the moment. I'm an ex-teacher. I retired back in 2005, and I worked in a pretty rough school in a dock area in the northwest. And I don't know whether you remember. You remember we had riots back then in the early 80s?
Yes, of course, yeah.
And they weren't on the scale of the last summer riots.
Broadwater Farm and Toxteth, yeah.
Yeah. And, they came very close to where I was living at that time. The point I wanted to make is that, parents are very important, and I still think they're the main place where kids learn morals, standards, etc. But then the school is also not far behind. But in many ways, and this is what I was going to say, things have deteriorated, and one of the things I think one of the reasons is that society itself, the standards that are expected in society now are dropped. Whether it's looking at politicians, what people expect, etc., the materialistic side of things.
Michael, thank you very, very much for calling us from Malta this morning. Thank you to everyone for your contributions, for your calls, your texts, your emails, your tweets. It's been a very revealing discussion. More to come with Victoria.